Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation on supporting English as a second language or dialect learners in secondary English. Students beginning their secondary schooling are expected by the culture to be able to read and write fluently. However, this is very rarely the case. The proportion of students with reading difficulties is even lower for students that come from First Nations, migrant, low socioeconomic, and regional backgrounds. The issue of reading difficulties can be defined as an inability for students to read effectively, which can be related to difficulties varying from letter/word decoding to the actual understanding of longer sentences. According to data from everyone's favourite test, NAPLAN, 23.6% of grade 9 students are at or below minimum national standards for literacy. This is a relevant issue and one worth examining. This presentation will summarise the research on what goes into being a capable reader and provide a summary of research-validated strategies that can assist ELD learners in the classroom. Before examining strategies to improve reading levels, it's important to understand what the two parts of reading actually are. Reading skills can be broken down into two main parts: word reading and language comprehension. Word reading is the ability for students to read words fluently and accurately, and has a lot to do with phonics. In other words, when you and I see the words C and H together on the page, we know as native speakers that it makes a ch sound. This is something, although we don't remember, that we had to learn. The same goes for students who do not speak English as a first language. The second domain is a language comprehension, and this refers to the ability to use linguistic knowledge to understand the meaning of written texts. The most important component of comprehension is background knowledge and especially vocabulary. So when we are talking about language comprehension, we're thinking about knowing the meaning behind words. I would like to stress again that there are learnt skills that we often take for granted. Students who speak English as a second language will not necessarily have these skills, so it is the responsibility of the school and educators to help them develop these core skills no matter their age. This idea is echoed strongly by both the Australian curriculum and the Impartway Declaration. This declaration is one of education's most important documents. This document clearly states that educators must provide all their students with high quality education that is inclusive and free of any form of discrimination. So how do we go about helping these students in the context of an English classroom? There are a number of strategies we could implement, but it's important to note first, however, that 7 to 10 English curriculum is made up of 3 interrelating strands, and that reading skills are required to respond effectively to all 3. The 3 strands include language, literacy, and literature. Before we begin talking about strategies, we have to assess the student's reading ability at the beginning of the year. No student is the same, and it's important that we don't make assumptions of personal experience. Research suggests that formative, not summative assessment is the best way of assessing an ELD student's reading level, as they don't perform well on standardized tests due to their language proficiency. Now that we know that ELD students need help, and which ones need help, what can we do to help them? The 3 main strategies that come up in the literature time and time again is the use of explicit instruction, implementing the student's primary language into the curriculum, and using decodable texts. Research supports the use of explicit instruction in the learning of phonetics, syntax, decoding, and the acquisition of vocabulary. I would like to highlight that lack of vocabulary was highlighted as the primary cause in the literature for poor reading skills in ELD students. So, how would the use of explicit instruction look in the English classroom? If a poem was being analysed, for example, teachers could break down particular words in the poem at the beginning of the lesson into a glossary. So when the students work on the poem individually, they understand how to read the word and also the meaning behind it. Utilising the student's primary language was another strategy highlighted in the literature, as primary language skills are a rich resource for learning and accessing the curriculum. Educators could look to incorporate translations of vocab lists, provide subtitles and digital text, and group students with the same language peer as ways to improve students' reading ability. An example of this in an English classroom would be if students were asked to examine an introduction to a particular piece of literature, the teacher could hand out a translation of that same literature in the primary language of the student to assist them in following on. Text is such a massive part of the English curriculum that educators need to make sure that ELD students can access them effectively. Using decodable text is a way of doing this. Decodable texts expose ELD learners to new words and their meanings, and increase in complexity as students deepen their phonetic knowledge. Decodable texts are scaled to the individual reading level of students, so that they can learn at their level. To summarise the main points in the presentation today, there is a problem with students with poor reading skills in Australia, especially among students who speak English as a second language. There are two parts to reading, word reading and language comprehension, and the strategies need to be aimed at both of these domains. The three best strategies according to literature to do this is using explicit instruction, making use of the student's primary language, and implementing decodable texts. If educators implement these research-validated strategies into the classroom, we will see improvement in the reading skills of ELD students.